I think we finally found something that we can agree on.
You know what? You might just be right on this one, man.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to the heaviest show in the universe. Today, we have an absolute banger of a review with the band UNDEATH's brand new album, It's Time to Rise from the Grave. Let's get right into it. Now, UNDEATH is kind of a brand new band. They've released one album previously around 2020, and since then, they've done some tours and things like that, but they're still not big, even in the death metal scene. I hadn't heard of them until today. These guys are from Rochester, New York, and their brand of music is unadulterated, knuckle-dragging, sludging death metal. So right off the bat, these guys have a super nostalgic sound to their music. It's kind of like Power Trip, except if Power Trip was playing death metal. So you know the vibe Power Trip gives off? It's super old school, kind of hardcore thrash vibes. Well, UNDEATH is killing it in that same regard. I don't want to say they sound just like old Gorguts before Obscura, but I mean, that's the vibe that they give off. But it's somehow original. Like, it doesn't sound like they're ripping off Gorguts riff for riff. They're putting their own little twist on it. They're putting their own little twist on the production and the drumming especially. They're not ripping off any of these old bands per se, but they definitely are taking inspiration from them. For instance, a lot of the solos, they sound like Trey off of Altars of Madness. And the song Head Splattered 7 Ways could have been stripped right off of The Bleeding. And again, I want to make it perfectly clear that these guys aren't ripping them off. This still sounds original. You can just tell exactly where their inspirations come from. They do a very good job of this. And they seem to be able to top every single riff that comes after. Every single time your mind is blown by how heavy or groovy or stanky every riff becomes. And the last 3 tracks on the album, they do get a bit more original, adding a bit of melody into them where there was not much of that in bands like Cannibal Corpse, especially in those late 80s, early 90s. So adding that melody in those last 3 songs especially really does make them a lot more original than they sound at first. But again, I think the band that they remind me of the most is definitely Gorguts from those first 2 albums before they went super avant-garde with Obscura. But seriously, good lord, like some of these riffs are absolute bangers. Some of these tracks are just absolutely mind-blowing, and not in an uber technical way. There's nothing technical about this album. There's nothing progressive about this album. This is not tech death. This is not prog death. This is not prog at all in any way, shape, or form. This is pure, unadulterated, knuckle-dragging, stank face-inducing death metal ripped straight from the late 80s and early 90s. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It damn well knows what it is, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. The absolute best part of this album, though, is the drums. Like, dude, this guy is insane. The way he plays the drums is definitely unique, and it sounds fantastic, and it fits right in on this album. I absolutely loved it. It was probably my favorite part of the whole album. The drummer's name is Matt Browning, so Matt, if you happen to watch this, props to you, dude. You are killing it. There's not much more I could say to compliment this album except for it's one of the best death metal albums I've ever heard. And it is likely the best death metal album that I've heard, pure death metal, that I have heard in the last 5-10 years maybe. They've definitely joined bands like Gatecreeper in the revival of that old school death metal sound, and I'm all for it. Really, the only thing bad I have to say about this album is that if they kept doing this, like onto their next album, it could get a little boring, or at least not as good as it is right now. You can only rely on nostalgia for so long, but I have a feeling they're gonna find a way to get over that hump. And also the bass is too low in the mix, but I mean, that's kind of death metal for you and a lot of metal in general, so it's not the biggest detriment. And there are times where they do have breaks where you actually can hear the bass come through, and it's pretty stanky. It's got a nice tone to it. Other than that, there's not much else I can say that's bad about this album. Again, one of the best death metal albums I've ever heard, and definitely probably the best death metal album that's been released in the past 5 or 10 years. Adding up each individual score of each individual song and dividing by the number of songs on the album, we come to a final score of 9.4 out of 10, which on the heaviest show in the universe rating scale comes to GOAT, and is the first album to ever receive that certification from this channel, so congrats to UNDEATH. It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you get to go and enjoy this album and get some unadulterated old school death metal pumped into your veins, because I absolutely loved it. It was super refreshing. It was very enjoyable. Thank you again for watching. We're going to see you next week on the heaviest show in the universe. Long live metal.